Friends, let me introduce to you Doug Cremer. Doug is an ordained deacon in the Catholic Archdiocese of Los Angeles. Doug is not only a deacon, but he's also a husband, a dad, a university professor, and he's made his debut as a poet. Doug brings all of this to the presence of deacon. You're also going to see that Doug has a keen sense of what it means to be called to service within his faith community. Doug Cremer is a longtime member of his church community. Since 2014, he has served that community as an ordained deacon. St. Elizabeth of Hungary sits in the city of Altadena, California, designed architecturally according to the Spanish mission tradition. During our conversation, Deacon Doug showed himself to be a highly intelligent and articulate person with a sense of what's truly important, what's truly essential to ministry within a faith community. What do you do as a deacon? Let's start with here at the parish.
I kind of do what people have asked me to do. I think one of the roles of a deacon is to be responsive to the call of the community. I mean, it's how one finds oneself in this state, right? You feel a call from God, you feel a call from the community, people sort of start planting seeds and ideas in your head, certainly in my case.
So it sounds like the community saw your involvement in ministry.
Yeah.
And it occurred to them that you would be a good deacon.
Yeah. And so I had, I've told you this story before, a mutual friend of ours, Juliet, came to my house one evening, right around dusk, knocked on the door, I answered the door. She just looked at me right in the face and said, I think you should be a deacon. You need to pray about that. Turned around and left.
Yeah.
And kind of left me with this thought. It was like, well, if there's no more direct call from somebody in your community.
Yeah. Our conversation shifted to the Catholic deacon as a married man. Do you think you bring a different presence as a married man who's a father of two daughters?
Yeah.
Different from other clergy who are not married and celibate?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. It's that some parishioners feel more comfortable, I think, talking to me about concerns they have in their family life that they might not feel as comfortable with a priest. They often feel comfortable talking with my wife, especially women who may not want to talk to a male about things that are going on. They'll seek her out and ask her counsel and her advice about things. So there's a way that the deacons' wives, I think, play an important role. For us, it's been very much, I know some deacon couples, they do a lot of things together. For Phyllis and I, we've always had our different ministries. We've always been involved in the church in various ways, but as two separate people who live together and love each other and work together, but don't play the same roles with each other. She's always had her ministries, her work in the church as well as I. I don't preach from the pulpit. I tend to preach down in front of the people, in front of the altar. I think it's important to sort of be in that place because it represents who deacons are in lots of ways, right? The person who sort of stands with one foot in the clergy and one foot in the people of God. I've got a profession, I've got a life, I've got a family, I've got a marriage, and I've got an ordained ministry. And I need to remind myself, not just mentally or spiritually, but physically, like this is where I stand when I preach, right? She's African American, and I'm obviously not. My ethnic background is half Anglo and half Sicilian. And so we've been married 34 years now as a mixed race couple. And so it's obvious the minute people meet us that we have differences that we need to negotiate. And I think we provide in that way even a symbol of what church can be and provide. Because the thing that unites us has been our faith from the beginning. Right? We were both baptized Catholic, both raised Catholic, both went to Catholic schools. both found each other working in ministry. I was teaching at a Catholic high school after leaving the seminary, and she was hired as the campus minister in 1985, and that's how we met. So church has always been something that brought us together. Our faith has always been something that brought us together, despite all our differences. And so we had lots of things in common that once you get past the skin color difference, you realize that there's a lot of our experiences are quite the same, as much as they can be different as well. And that, I think, has helped us a lot in terms of also relating to people in the parish, as you realize it's, we especially in our society, I think, focus a lot on difference, and we don't spend as much time seeking out as well the commonalities that lie within. And so I think a lot of our ministries together have been about finding those common grounds, those common foundations in our faith and in our lives that unite us, and then negotiating the differences around that commonality.
Let me ask you about your lifelong call as well to be a professor.
Oh yeah.
You're an academician, you're a published professor at Woodbury University, you're accomplished. How does this integrate or play into your call as a deacon?
It's a challenge, and it's also a great strength. Being a deacon and a minister has helped inform the way I'm a professor, right? That I'm much more, I think, compassionate and understanding of where my students are at and where they're coming from, listening more to what they need and what they seek to gain out of being in any one of my classes. Rather than thinking, here, I've got this body of material and you need to learn it. It's more like, well, what have you come here to learn? Tell me, if you can, what you need, and I will try to give it to you. Which I think is in some ways what a deacon does as well. The first thing is always, right, what can I do for you? Not, here's what I am and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. It's like the first question is always, it's like being a server. How can I help you? Right? You tell me what you need from me and I'll see what I can do to help us get there.
Deacon Doug, I also know that you're a poet. You publish your poetry on Twitter on a regular basis. I read it. I read all of your poems. Where does that poetry come from? Where is it welling up from?
I think it just comes from life. It comes from things I'm feeling or experiencing at the moment. It comes out of a reflection on the week's scriptures that I have to prepare for preaching too. And I think that's part of the way I try to deal with not being, as you were asking before, professorial in the pulpit, right? Is to try to be more poetic. Because I think good preaching has to be like good poetry. It has to have a rhythm to it. It has to have a beginning and a middle and an end that isn't just narrative or isn't an argument, but is really kind of a, how do I put it? An evocation of a mood, a provocation of a thought or a feeling in the listener. And poetry is a lot like that.
Deacon Doug, through his poetry, does not shy away from addressing current political issues.
Yeah.
Is this appropriate? That a deacon be making commentary either in the pulpit or through his Twitter poetry feed on politics? Do you see the role of the deacon operative here?
Yeah, I do, but it's not my opinion about things. It is, again, going back to this question of how is the scripture and how our practice of our faith relates to the political questions of today at a fundamental level. What are the basic principles, the basic beliefs that we need to bring to whatever question is troubling us these days? I think a lot of times we jump right into what our positions are. Whether it's about racism or about abortion or about political partisanship or about the individual actions of a political leader, about questions of war, questions of peace, questions of poverty. I mean, we all jump right away, even in our church, to like, what do we do about this? And we don't take the time to sit back and go, well, wait a minute, remind ourselves once again what our core beliefs are. what our core foundational values are, that we need to bring to then whatever answer we want to bring to this question. Pope Francis keeps trying to remind us in the 8 years he's been Pope, right, about God's mercy and forgiveness. And you have to start with those realities. Right? The reality of creation, the reality of God's love, the reality of mercy in our lives. And from that, all those propositions, all those statements sort of derive. But if you're not in touch with that core sense of, God loves us and God forgives us and God is merciful towards us, and that we are called primarily more than anything else to be loving and giving and merciful as our God is, then the rest of it is just a lot of talk. Love God and love each other. Whatever you do, you judge against those two things.
At the end of the interview, the last question: why be a deacon? Why are you doing this?
When I was 12 in 8th grade, I was asked by my pastor at the time to lecture at the just started Saturday Vigil Mass. This would have been 1971. And we had just started doing Saturday evening Masses for the first time. And he wanted young people to come to the Mass on a Saturday. And so he asked me as a 12-year-old if I would be the lector at the Saturday evening Mass. It felt right. It felt like this is where I belonged, right? And so it spent a long time, through teenage years, the early 20s, kind of wrestling with, well, what does this really mean? You constantly do this thing when you're called to a leadership role or a ministry role, it's like checking your ego. How much of this is just me wanting this because it feels good? And how much of this is something I'm really being asked by someone outside of myself? Just how much are you really being drawn by others? That other being everyone from God to your family, to your community, to your friends, to this role. And how much of this is your own inner need, right?
It's both, right?
It's both, but it's much more the former than the latter. The inner need or the inner gifts have to be there, in a sense, to respond to the call. But it's a response, it's not an origin. It doesn't start with me. It starts with others.
Pray rather about what you can replace to lighten the load that you must embrace. Fear cast out by love, anger by patience, resentment by joy, darkness by brilliance. If carry we must these weights of our time, we also can choose what shortens the climb. Let the poem speak for the heart of the poet. Doug Cremer seeks to bring all of this to his marriage, his family, his career, and of course his ministry. Deacon Cremer doesn't tell people what to believe and doesn't want to tell people what their opinions should be. But he does invite us to contemplate these deeper realities and truths of faith. I can't think of anything more important at this moment in time for the credibility and viability of the church, and for that matter, all of Christianity, as we seek to move forward towards the future. Bill Shawls, wishing each of you shalom, peace, be well.